Have you ever smiled while your heart was breaking? Have you ever stood in a room full of family and realized that you don't actually belong there? Because that's exactly how I felt on my 26th birthday. My name is Daniel Parker. And if there's one thing you need to know about my family, it's this. My younger sister, Olivia, was the center of everyone's universe. Growing up, I didn't hate her. In fact, I loved her. She was my little sister. But somewhere along the way, my parents stopped seeing us as two children and started treating us like there was one star and one extra. And I was the extra. When Olivia got good grades, my parents celebrated with expensive dinners. When I got better grades, they told me to keep working hard. When Olivia wanted a new phone, she got it the next day. When I needed a laptop for college, I worked part-time and bought one myself. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that one day things would change. I was wrong. By the time I turned 26, I had built a decent life for myself. I had a stable job in finance, a small apartment, and a wonderful girlfriend named Sophie. She was kind, patient, and somehow understood me better than anyone else. A week before my birthday, my mother called me. "Daniel, don't make any plans on Saturday," she said excitedly. "We're throwing a family party." I smiled. A family party. For me, that had never happened before. Maybe this was it. Maybe my parents had finally realized how distant we'd become. Maybe this birthday would be different. For the entire week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Even Sophie noticed. "You seem happy," she said while we were having dinner. "I think my parents are trying," I replied. She smiled, but didn't say anything. I think she didn't want to ruin my excitement. Saturday finally arrived. I drove to my parents' house carrying a cake and a bottle of wine. The house looked beautiful. Balloons were everywhere. Music was playing. Cars filled the driveway. I remember feeling emotional. Maybe I had been wrong all these years. Maybe my family really did care. As soon as I walked inside, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" I laughed. For the first time in years, I felt special. Then I noticed something strange. Everything was pink. Pink balloons. Pink ribbons. Pink flowers. I frowned. Then I saw a giant banner hanging above the fireplace. "Happy birthday, Olivia!" I froze. For a second, I honestly thought I had walked into the wrong house. Then my mother rushed toward me. "Oh good, you're here," she said. I looked at the banner. "Mom, it's my birthday." She looked uncomfortable. "Well, yes. But your birthday and Olivia's are only 3 days apart, so we thought we'd celebrate both together." Both together. Except there wasn't a single decoration with my name on it. Not one. I looked around the room. Every gift on the table had Olivia's name on it. Every card, every balloon, everything. I felt stupid. I had spent an entire week believing this party was for me. Sophie squeezed my hand. She could already tell I was hurt. I tried to smile. I really did. Then my father clapped his hands. "Everyone, come outside." People started moving toward the front yard. I followed behind them. And then I saw it. A brand new BMW. A huge red bow sat on the hood. Olivia screamed. "Oh my God! Is that mine?" My mother laughed. My father handed her the keys. "It's all yours, sweetheart." Everyone cheered. People took pictures. Some relatives even started crying. Meanwhile, I just stood there. I couldn't move. A brand new BMW. For her birthday. Then my mother walked over to me with an envelope. She smiled. "Happy birthday, honey." I opened it. Inside were 2 $1 bills. $2. I stared at them. I actually thought it was a joke. I looked up. Nobody was laughing. My mother smiled proudly. "It's symbolic," she said. "You always say you don't need much." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at the BMW, then at the $2 in my hand. I suddenly felt like I was 6 years old again. Forgotten. Invisible. Unimportant. A cousin next to me whispered, "That's messed up." Another relative looked embarrassed. Even Olivia looked uncomfortable for a moment. But my parents didn't notice. They were too busy taking pictures beside the car. I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. Hope. The hope that one day they would treat me the same, the hope that one day I would matter, it disappeared right there in my parents' driveway. Sophie gently touched my arm. "Daniel, let's go." I looked at her. For the first time in my life, I didn't make excuses for my parents. I didn't defend them. I didn't pretend everything was okay. I simply nodded. We turned around and started walking toward the car. Then my mother called out, "Daniel, where are you going? We haven't cut the cake yet." I turned around slowly. "What cake?" She looked confused. "The birthday cake." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh people make when their heart is breaking. "Mom," I said quietly, "whose name is on the cake?" Silence. Nobody answered, because everyone already knew the party wasn't for me. I was just invited to watch my sister be celebrated. Again. My father crossed his arms. "Don't be dramatic." Those 4 words hit harder than anything else. Don't be dramatic. As if years of disappointment were just me being sensitive. As if being handed $2 while my sister received a luxury car was completely normal. I reached into the envelope. I pulled out the 2 $1 bills. Then I placed them on the hood of the BMW. "You guys keep it," I said. And then I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye, I just left. That night, sitting in my apartment, I stared at my phone for hours. No calls, no texts, no apology, nothing. At midnight, my phone finally buzzed. I picked it up immediately. It was from my mother. I opened the message, and the words I read would change my life forever. "You're being selfish. You ruined your sister's birthday." I stared at the screen, over and over again. Then I slowly realized something terrifying. In my parents' story, I was never the son. I was the problem. And I had no idea that this message would be the beginning of a chain of events that would eventually leave my parents standing in my driveway years later, begging for help from the son they never valued. I didn't reply to my mother's text. I couldn't. I sat there on my couch staring at the words, "You ruined your sister's birthday," and felt completely empty. The strange thing was that I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of being disappointed. Tired of pretending that things would eventually get better. Tired of giving my family chance after chance only to end up hurt again. Sophie sat beside me in silence for a long time before finally asking a question that changed everything. "Daniel, when was the last time your parents made you feel loved?" I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. I tried thinking of a memory, a birthday, a graduation, a family trip, anything, but I couldn't think of a single moment. That scared me. I had spent 26 years fighting for love that I couldn't even remember receiving. Sophie gently took my hand. "You deserve better than this." For some reason, those 4 words made me cry. Not because they were sad, because they were true. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. Not from my parents, from relatives. Apparently, my mother had spent the entire night telling everyone that I had stormed out of the party because I was jealous of Olivia's new car. According to her version of the story, I had ruined the celebration and embarrassed the family. I couldn't believe it. Some relatives sent supportive messages, but others told me I should apologize because family was more important than money. Money? They thought I was upset about the BMW. They didn't understand. The car wasn't the problem. The problem was what it represented. Years of favoritism, years of being second place, years of being invisible. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. I answered. "Are you done acting like a child?" he asked immediately. No hello, no concern, no apology, just anger. I closed my eyes. "You gave Olivia a BMW and gave me $2, so what?" he replied. "You've always been independent." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So because I'm independent, I matter less," he sighed. "You're twisting things." No. For once I was seeing things exactly as they were. Then he said something that I would never forget. "You should be happy for your sister instead of making everything about yourself." I almost laughed. Everything about myself? It was my birthday. I suddenly realized there was no point arguing anymore. They would never understand. Because understanding would require admitting they had done something wrong, and they would never do that. I quietly said goodbye and ended the call. Then I made a decision. For the first time in my life, I stopped reaching out. No calls, no messages, no family dinners, nothing. A week passed, then 2, then a month. Nobody contacted me. That hurt more than I expected, because it proved something painful. I had always been the one keeping the relationship alive. Without my effort, there was no relationship. 2 months later, my life actually started feeling lighter. Sophie and I spent more time together. I focused on work. I started going to the gym again. I laughed more. I slept better. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Then one evening, my cousin Emma called. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." Her voice sounded nervous. What happened? She took a deep breath. Your parents are in trouble. Apparently my father had taken out a huge loan to buy Olivia's BMW. I couldn't believe it. The car wasn't even fully paid for. Even worse, Olivia had recently quit another job and wasn't helping with the payments. Everything was falling apart financially. But that's not all, Emma said. I could hear hesitation in her voice. What? She sighed. They're planning to ask you for money. I nearly dropped my phone. What? They think you'll help because you're responsible. There was that word again. Responsible. I hated that word. Because in my family, responsible didn't mean respected. It meant useful. It meant being the person everyone depended on while giving nothing in return. I thanked Emma for telling me. Then I sat in silence for a long time. 3 days later, my mother finally called. I knew exactly why. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She sounded unusually cheerful. She asked about work. She asked about Sophie. She even asked if I was happy. For a few minutes, it almost felt like a normal conversation. Then she said it. We need a little help. There it was, the real reason for the call. Apparently, my parents were struggling financially. The BMW payments were too high, the credit cards were nearly full, and Olivia was having a difficult time finding another job. Then my mother asked me a question that left me speechless. Would you be willing to lend us $20,000? $20,000. I couldn't believe it. They hadn't spoken to me in months. They ignored my birthday. They blamed me for leaving the party. And now they wanted money. I remained silent. My mother kept talking. You're doing well, Daniel. We know you've saved money. I slowly realized something. They weren't asking because they loved me. They were asking because they needed me. There was a huge difference. I asked one simple question. Would you have called if you didn't need money? Silence. That silence gave me my answer. Then she quietly said something that broke my heart. We're family. Family. It was amazing how that word only appeared when they wanted something. I looked around my apartment, at the photos of Sophie and me, at the peaceful life I had built, at everything I had achieved without their support. And suddenly I knew exactly what I needed to do. I took a deep breath. No. Silence. Then my mother started crying. She said I was abandoning my family. She said my father was stressed. She said Olivia needed help. I listened quietly. Then I said something I had never said before. Maybe it's time Olivia learns that actions have consequences. The crying stopped. You don't mean that, but I did. For the first time in my life, I truly meant it. I wished them well and ended the call. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because 2 days later, someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it, and standing there with tears in her eyes and a suitcase beside her was Olivia. The same sister who got the BMW, the same sister who had always been chosen over me, and the words that came out of her mouth changed everything. Daniel. Mom and Dad lost the house. I stood there in complete shock as I looked at my sister. Olivia's eyes were red from crying, and the expensive clothes she always wore looked wrinkled and messy. Beside her sat a suitcase. For the first time in my life, she didn't look like the confident golden child who always got everything she wanted. She looked scared. Mom and Dad lost the house, she repeated quietly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What do you mean they lost the house? I asked. She looked down at the floor. They couldn't keep up with the payments anymore. I stepped aside and let her come inside. Sophie walked into the living room and immediately noticed the look on Olivia's face. She sat down without saying a word. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Olivia finally started talking. After buying the BMW, my parents had continued spending money they didn't have. They wanted to maintain appearances. They wanted relatives and friends to think everything was perfect. They took vacations, bought expensive furniture, and kept helping Olivia financially whenever she had problems. The problem was that they weren't wealthy. They were drowning in debt. Apparently, my father had taken out loans to cover old loans. Credit cards were maxed out. Savings were gone. Their retirement account had almost completely disappeared. I couldn't believe it. All these years I thought my parents were financially comfortable. They weren't. They had been pretending. Then came the worst part. The BMW wasn't the only expensive thing they had bought for Olivia. Over the years, they had secretly paid for her rent, her credit cards, and even several failed business ideas. Every time she got into trouble, they rescued her, again and again. Eventually, there was nothing left to rescue her with. I looked at my sister. Why are you here? She took a deep breath. They're staying with Aunt Carol for now. I nodded slowly. And you? Tears filled her eyes. I have nowhere to go. I closed my eyes. This was the same sister who had always been treated like a princess. The same sister who got the BMW. The same sister who always came first. And now she was sitting in my living room with a suitcase. Life really could change quickly. A few minutes later, my phone started ringing. I didn't even need to look. I already knew who it was. My father, I answered. For the first time in my life, he sounded broken. Daniel, there was a long silence. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. We need help. I leaned back in my chair. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to cry. After everything that had happened, after years of being forgotten, ignored, and treated like an afterthought, here we were. They needed me. My father explained that the bank had taken the house. They were struggling to pay bills. They didn't know what to do. Then he asked if Olivia could stay with me for a while. I looked at my sister. She looked embarrassed, ashamed, small. For the first time, I realized something important. She wasn't the villain. She had simply grown up in a system that taught her she would always be rescued. The real problem had always been my parents. They created this situation. They taught her that consequences didn't apply to her. I agreed to let Olivia stay temporarily. She looked shocked. So, you're not angry? I smiled sadly. I've been angry for a very long time. I'm just tired now. That night, after Olivia went to bed, Sophie sat beside me. What are you thinking? She asked. I looked toward the guest room. I'm thinking about how strange life is, she smiled softly. What do you mean? I spent years wanting my parents to need me. I thought if they ever needed me, maybe they would finally appreciate me. I paused. But now that it has happened, I don't feel happy because I didn't. I felt sad. Sad that everything had to fall apart before they finally looked in my direction. Over the next few weeks, Olivia stayed with us. Something unexpected happened during that time. We actually talked. Really talked. For the first time in years. One evening, she admitted something I never expected. I always knew Mom and Dad treated us differently. I looked at her in surprise. You did? She nodded slowly. I just never thought about how much it hurt you. Silence filled the room. Then she looked at me. I'm sorry, Daniel. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Because in 26 years, I had never heard an apology from anyone in my family. Not once. I realized something in that moment. The person I had expected to apologize the least was the first one to do it. Months passed. My parents continued living with my aunt. I kept my distance. Then one afternoon, my mother called. Her voice sounded different, softer, older. She asked if she and my father could come visit. I almost said no, but something stopped me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure, maybe both. The following Sunday they arrived. Opened the door, I barely recognized them. My father looked exhausted. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, my father spoke. I'm sorry. I froze. Those 2 words were something I had waited my entire life to hear. Then my mother started crying. She admitted that they had made mistakes. She admitted they had favored Olivia. She admitted they expected too much from me because I was always responsible. I listened quietly. For the first time, they weren't making excuses. They were telling the truth. My mother looked around my apartment. You built a beautiful life. I smiled slightly. I had to. Tears filled her eyes. That sentence seemed to hurt her, because we both knew what it meant. I built this life without their support, without their help, without their approval. Then my father said something that left the room completely silent. We spent so much time trying to give everything to one child that we forgot to love the other one properly. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing to say. The truth had finally been spoken out loud, and somehow, hearing it didn't make me feel victorious. It just made me feel free, because for years I wondered if I had imagined everything. I hadn't. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't too sensitive. I had simply been hurt. And finally, someone admitted it. After my parents left that afternoon, I sat alone in the living room for a long time. Sophie had gone to make coffee, and Olivia was in the guest room. The apartment was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying my father's words. We forgot to love the other one properly. For years I had dreamed about hearing something like that. I imagined that if my parents ever admitted the truth, all my pain would disappear. I thought I would feel happy or relieved. Instead, I felt calm because their apology didn't change my childhood. It didn't change the birthdays they forgot. It didn't change the graduations they barely celebrated. It didn't change the day they handed my sister a BMW and handed me $2. But it did give me something I never had before: closure. Over the next few weeks, my parents started visiting more often. The conversations were awkward at first. We didn't suddenly become a perfect family. Years of hurt don't disappear overnight. Sometimes we would sit together for 20 minutes and barely speak. Other times we would talk about simple things like work, movies, or old family memories. One evening, my mother looked around my apartment and smiled. "You've built a wonderful life, Daniel." I thanked her. Then she looked down at her hands. We weren't there for most of it. I didn't say anything because she was right. They weren't there when I got my first promotion. They weren't there when I bought my first apartment. They weren't there when Sophie and I got engaged. They had missed so many important moments. And the sad part was that they could never get those moments back. A few days later, Olivia came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "I found something in my suitcase," she said. She handed me a small envelope. I looked at it. Immediately, I recognized it. The birthday envelope. The same envelope my mother had given me on the day of the BMW. I slowly opened it. Inside were the same two $1 bills. I looked up. "Why do you have these?" Olivia smiled sadly. "After you left the party, I picked them up from the hood of my car." I stared at her. "I don't know why I kept them," she said quietly. "Maybe because deep down I knew something about that day was wrong." Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I hated being the favorite." I looked at her in surprise. She laughed softly. "I know that sounds strange, but it's true. Mom and Dad never let me fail. They never let me make mistakes. They solved every problem for me, and because of that, I never learned how to solve anything myself." I had never thought about it that way. I spent my entire life believing she had the perfect childhood. Maybe she didn't. Maybe favoritism had damaged both of us, just in different ways. She looked at me and smiled. "You became strong because nobody rescued you." I looked at the $2 in my hand. Maybe she was right. A month later, my parents invited Sophie and me to dinner. They had rented a small apartment and were trying to rebuild their lives. The huge house was gone. The expensive lifestyle was gone. For the first time in years, they seemed different. Humbler, quieter, more honest. During dinner, my father suddenly disappeared into another room and came back carrying a small box. "This belongs to you," he said. I opened it. Inside were old photographs, pictures from my childhood, my school awards, drawings I had made as a kid, certificates from sports competitions. I looked at him confused. He smiled sadly. "I kept all of them. I didn't understand. If you kept all of this, why did it always feel like none of it mattered?" My father looked down, then he answered, "Because I thought being hard on you would make you stronger. And because I was so busy giving everything to your sister that I forgot you needed love too." The room became completely silent. My mother started crying again. For the first time in my life, I realized something. Parents can love their children and still fail them. They can mean well and still cause pain. They can make mistakes so big that those mistakes shape an entire childhood. That realization didn't excuse what happened, but it helped me understand it. A few months later, I invited my parents to dinner at my apartment. As we sat around the table laughing about something silly, I noticed how different everything felt. For the first time, nobody was competing for attention. Nobody was being compared. Nobody was being ignored. We were simply a family trying to start over. Would things ever be perfect? No. Some scars never fully disappear. But healing doesn't require perfection. It only requires honesty. After dinner, my mother handed me a small gift. I opened it. Inside was a tiny picture frame. In the center of the frame were two $1 bills. I looked at her in confusion. She smiled through her tears. "I know we can never take back what happened," she said softly, "but I hope one day these $2 remind you not of what we gave you, but of how far you've come." I couldn't speak. I just stared at the frame. Then I smiled, because she was right. Those $2 no longer represented rejection. They represented survival. They represented every difficult day that forced me to become independent. Every disappointment that made me stronger. Every painful moment that pushed me to build my own life. Years later, that frame still sits on a shelf in my office. People often ask me why I keep two $1 bills displayed like a trophy. I simply smile. Because those $2 taught me the most important lesson of my life. Sometimes the people who fail to see your value are the very reason you discover it yourself. Sometimes being overlooked teaches you how to stand on your own. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't buying a bigger house, making more money, or proving anyone wrong. The greatest revenge is building a happy life and realizing you no longer need the approval you once begged for. As for my family, things were never perfect after that, but they became real. And honestly, real was all I ever wanted. Because in the end, I didn't need a BMW. I didn't need expensive gifts. I didn't need to be anyone's favorite. I only wanted to be seen. And finally, I was.